So after what seems so long, we finally get Floki back. And if we weren't spoiled enough, they give us the exact battle we've been looking for. This episode showed us that Vikings wants to go out with a bang. They're not holding back on the battles, mystery, or even character deaths. Everyone is fair game at this point, from Ivar to Alfred and maybe even Ivar. So often when you watch shows, major characters have plot armor and the story has to continue, so things can't really come to a close. But now I'm fully drawn in, I'm watching every single scene, waiting for those moments where things could fall to pieces or something amazing could happen. And Ivar's storyline definitely had a lot of those opportunities. So luckily Vikings didn't skip ahead and we get to pick up right where we left off as Ivar and his crew get surrounded by the village warriors. Even though these two groups hadn't outright attacked each other and things started off peaceful by exchanging gifts, the characters are all pretty aware that things could fall to pieces in a blink of an eye. You can almost say that the whole atmosphere is as tight as a string on a bow. Sensing this possible fallout, Bambanui steps forward and makes a very clear gesture of peace. So they all get invited to the family hut and things start off pretty awkward as they realize just how useful sharing a language truly is. But regardless, they manage to stumble through the conversation and even get a couple gaffes out from the children. And it seems they're not only fortunate in just arriving and surviving, but also they've been taken in and protected by this group, which is pretty amazing considering they're strangers from almost a different world entirely. So Ivar, curious as ever to know more about them and also realizing how dependent they may become on them, decides it'd be a good idea to invite them back to their place and return the favor. Surprisingly, even this simple small scene of them arriving to the settlement is done really well. It's so clear how much attention to detail and thought went into every single costume, design, boat, and shot we get. I felt like I was almost getting lulled into some kind of peaceful trance just watching these scenes. The music's so calming, the atmosphere is so fun, as Vikings kind of gives us a slice of life, but American style. It's cultural exchange at its most grassroots. It's just seeing the way someone dresses, the way they do their hair while they eat, and imitating and exploring what that is. The warriors are more interested in the bows and the axes and the iron because they're big men and they do big men things. But they all enjoyed seeing the tapestries on Odir's skin and hearing his stories even if they can't understand what he's saying. Probably the most wholesome moment of the whole episode was when those kids were imitating his arm moves and trying to guess what he was getting at. And we also got to see Ivar trying to investigate how they found out a word from their culture, from their motherland, before they even arrived. And eventually, after he simplifies and simplifies down to the bare roots of what he's trying to ask, he gets the gist that they got the idea and the word from a crazy man. And I've already been hoping that they would reintroduce Floki in the story somehow, and so when I heard that, I was just like... But in all seriousness, it was so magical to finally see Floki return. The way they went full circle by placing these designs on the trees, highlighting those different moments from Ragnar's sagas, was just so beautifully done. We got everything from Ragnar's first raid, taking down the monastery of Lindisfarne, Bjorn single-handedly taking down a bear in the wilderness, the raid on Paris being held back by Rolor, and of course Ragnar's final moments as he dies to 1,000 snakes in England. Even the way Floki comes down by having the counterweight slowly drifted up behind him and he's just sitting on his swing looking all happy. The whole set and home really captured perfectly the spirit of Floki as a boat builder, a spiritual man, and a crazy man. And they're even building a plot for episode 20 in the background with a disgruntled settler who I think lost his wife in the journey over. He was starting to look pretty sus in the previous episode when he spotted that gold, and now we can see he's keen on finding out where the source is so he can get more. We know from the gold rushes in history that people can act very desperately and violently when they think that wealth can be gained from it. So we might even get a bit of action on the way out next episode, along with a reunion between Ivar and Floki, which will just be so cool. Now the English storyline also left with a kind of cliffhanger as well, as Ivar finally gained an idea of how they could cripple the forces of Alfred. But of course they cut off the episode right before we get any details, and as we return to the English storyline this episode, we stay with Alfred and his forces not knowing what Ivar's planned, cleverly making us just as blind as his forces and making us search in every scene for what Ivar could be doing and trying to figure out how they could get around it. They make it abundantly clear that Alfred expected Ivar and his Viking army to head straight for his villa to find it empty, so he's only really sending out a couple of scouts as a precaution, making it all that more believable that he can walk into a trap without knowing it's coming. I did quite enjoy the conversation he had with Alfred before the battle, speaking about how they've chosen the harder path to try and survive and fight instead of desperately trying to cling on to his honor and not accepting the reality of the situation. It was kind of fun in retrospect to look back at the episode and all the different ways they teased us with all these off-putting one-liners and ominous moments of foreshadowing. We had the men when they were talking around the fire, speaking how people were going missing when they were collecting mushrooms. They even joked how there was devils in the forest, and they weren't that wrong. Like, they weren't even that subtle about it. They had the giant cross fall over when it went into a ditch. Talk about a sign for things to come. Now, we did get to see a little bit of Ivar's trademark battle tactics back with the first battle with the Rus, but here we finally see him fully unleashed and in his element. He has his men come out to bait them forward, gets to place traps, have people hidden, build infrastructures and rafters for archers and him to look over the battle, and even the Ivar classic of burning people with flaming oil. And as the battle kind of continues, we cut across to the planning sequence and we see Ivar's reasoning behind his decisions. Which, funnily enough, most of his tactics are now illegal war crimes, so it kind of gives you an indication of how Ivar thinks. Ivar's whole technique around trying to injure someone so that more people have to help them is very similar to how snipers used to operate, wounding soldiers and then waiting for aid to come so you could take them out as well. A practice that the US military banned. And the spikes they have planted in the ground could basically just be hidden landmines, which again are also no longer allowed because they take people out indiscriminately, as they could accidentally kill someone who's walking through the forest years from now if it doesn't get triggered. And we're not even done there. We also see that he dresses up some of his soldiers in the enemy uniform to sneak them in and take out the queen, which is actually a 2-for-1, both targeting a civilian and using enemy uniforms. No wonder Ivar would gain such a massive reputation as a brutal warlord. But even with all these tactics and measures he put in place, the entire battle did come across more like a war of attrition. Most of the fighting itself seemed pretty chaotic and crazy with no structure or organization, and most certainly no ranks or formations. I can imagine a Roman commander shaking his head right now. But even with all this planning and fighting, the battle does come to an end with no winner, as the fog becomes so thick that no one really can see which way's which and who they're fighting. So as both the armies are retreating and people are trying to find which way they're supposed to be heading, Harold gets pulled up in the mix and gets lost. And then boom, out of nowhere, he gets skewered right through. And in these final dying moments, Halfdan appears, much like Jesus to Alfred, and helps him stand up one last time and take down the Saxon who thought he could kill Harold without a fight. So just as the brothers sang to each other in that battle that claimed Halfdan's life in episode 10 of season 5, they sing together yet again as Harold takes his final breaths. And just like that, they can finally reunite and drink together in the halls of Valhalla.
I will see you in Valhalla. I will see you in Valhalla. See you in Valhalla.
With Harold gone, Ivar is now truly the commander of the Viking forces, and even though they didn't win this battle decisively, they still are in a very good position to win the next one. Alfred was really concerned about staying in his villa, even though they had some defenses, he still believed that they would have lost. And now, on top of that, they're stuck in the middle of nowhere, suffering huge amounts of losses to Ivar's traps, putting them in a pretty desperate situation. And even so, Alfred is very determined to stand here and fight yet again. So episode 20 will show us what Alfred can do to try and turn around his luck, and how truly devastating a round 2 of Ivar might be. And if you thought the stuff with the New World, finding Floki, and the massive battle with Alfred and Ivar was cool, just wait to see what we've got planned in Kattegat. Oh boy, it's definitely the most exciting part of the episode. We're all so thrilled to see the antics that Ingrid and Eric are up to. Like, damn, I'm so invested. Whoa, what's that? Ingrid's got some assassins going to Denmark? That sounds like a pretty risky decision. Maybe it might start a war. What? She didn't tell Eric? Wow, that's so interesting. Lucky that slave he hired to kill her has got some more help. She seems really reliable. Wait a minute, she has a slave brand on her neck, just like Ingrid. He sold her too. Uh-oh. So they string them up on the street and put a rake through their heart, and everyone lives happily ever after. See you tomorrow, folks, for episode 20. It's gonna be a finale. It's gonna be sick. And in the meantime, leave your comments on this episode, what you thought, what was your favorite parts. I want to hear what you think. Skål!